This is the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast. I'm Lisa Salisbury, and this is episode 69, Healthy Meal Blueprint with ADHD specialist and coach Gaia Broda. I'm so glad you tuned into this episode because even if you don't have ADHD, the Healthy Meal Blueprint that Gaia shares today is helpful, honestly, for anyone. I think we all suffer with a little bit of attention problems these days. I mean, who hasn't started scrolling and looked up an hour later? Most of us could help ourselves out by simplifying things, and that's exactly what Gaia is here to help us with today. She focuses on and coaches folks with ADHD, so her tools work especially well for that population, but I don't know a single neurotypical brain that wouldn't also benefit from some simplification. Also, before we get into this episode, I want to let you know I am extending my Get UNSTUCK Sessions availability through the end of this calendar year. I know originally I said it was just for 6 weeks, but they've been so fun and I've enjoyed getting to know a lot of my listeners. So I just want to make sure you're ready to hit 2024 running. Link to get your sessions scheduled is in the show notes, of course. I've had a few people come just to discuss how to make it through the holidays, and that has been super helpful for them, I know. So I can't wait to talk to you too. Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for women who want to lose weight but are tired of counting and calculating all the food. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury. I'm a certified health and weight loss coach and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. I'll teach you to figure out why you are eating when you aren't hungry instead of worrying so much about what you are eating. I am so pleased to have Gaia Broda here with me today on the podcast. She is going to be talking to us all things ADHD, such a popular and timely, really just a pertinent topic to our world and to just a lot of things that are going on for us right now. So we're going to really be diving into how ADHD impacts our ability to make food choices that are good, whether you have it or not diagnosed. Sometimes our attention can be swayed by a lot of things going on in the world. So Gaia, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you came to this work and, how you got here today with me.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. This is exciting. My background is in fitness and wellness. So to talk about nutrition and eating healthy with all of your listeners today, I'm very excited for it. So how I kind of fell into this, I started as a personal trainer and doing the fitness and wellness coaching. I loved it. And then was diagnosed with ADHD about 2.5 years ago. And that was when, if any of your listeners are like diagnosed as ADHD, it's like everything kind of makes sense. Everything falls into place. You're like, oh, that was why this worked for me and all these other things, didn't work for me. So at that time, it made sense for me to switch my coaching to helping folks with ADHD. And that was in a wellness capacity. And over the course of those 2.5 years of navigating that recent diagnosis, I needed access to meds. I was really struggling, but it just didn't work for me. I didn't like how I felt. So from there, it was this journey of like, okay, I'm really struggling. I really don't like how these meds affect me. So how can I approach and live my life feeling as great as I can and living every day with so much attention in a natural way? So now I do help ADHDers find those long-term natural approaches to their ADHD so that they can show up every day with intention and really fulfill their dreams and desires.
Awesome. I think I want to first talk about how ADHD impacts your ability to eat well, but also because that is kind of a small percentage of my listeners, because even if you don't have diagnosed ADHD, I think attention is something that is really a concern in 2023. And what I mean by that is it's just sucked by so many things, social media in particular, but just general internet, generally being busy, generally just having 1,000 things to do. I find that a lot of times my clients and, people I do free sessions with, they just tell me, I'm just so busy. I can't eat well. And I think that some of these tools are going to be appropriate even if you don't have this diagnosis. Can you speak to that a little bit before we jump into some of these tools and tips that we're going to be discussing?
Definitely. And I love that you just laid that out for your listeners, Lisa, because what I'm going to be sharing, I'm sure many of you will resonate with. It's just if you are someone with ADHD, it's too more of an extreme. It's just that little bit more and makes it that bigger obstacle. But a lot of the things we struggle with is what most of us, everyone else struggles with as well. And just to make it some basic facts about ADHD, this means either hyperactive or inattentive or a bit of both. So it's AD, H is optional, D. And that doesn't mean we can't focus. It just means we focus maybe on the wrong things. We can hyper focus on something that can be to our detriment or can really help us. And our brains are just so busy. It's just a simple way to put it, where it's like a traffic jam, but all the traffic lights are completely out and you're trying to navigate traffic, but it's rush hour and there's a jam. Like, what do you do? So we have all these thoughts and all the information. We know how to eat well, but we're like, I don't know the next step. I don't know how to put all these pieces together.
Yeah. I think in another way that some of us who don't have this diagnosis can see ourselves, which just reminds me of when I was in college and I took an abnormal psychology class. And it was really an impactful class for me. I remember a lot of it. It could be because I took it with my then fiance, who's now my husband, and we studied a lot together. So it was fun to do that. But our teacher was like, listen, like on the first day, she was like, listen, you're going to see yourself in almost every one of these disorders we talk about. Everybody has a little of this and a little of that. And she just would remind us like all semester long, do not diagnose yourself. And it's totally normal to find. And so some days you're kind of sad. And it doesn't mean you have clinical depression. I mean, if you do, please get help. I'm not saying nobody does, right? But we can have small d depression, which is like the emotion of sadness. We can have small a anxiety, not big A diagnosable, clinical anxiety. Everyone gets anxious sometimes. And I think everyone has attention issues sometimes, especially when we get sucked into, like I said, social media, especially. I guess that's just been on my mind a lot lately, that I feel like it's like a time suck. So you'll notice me if you follow me on Instagram, you'll be like, oh, she's back. And she'll post, a reel and tons of stories. And then all of a sudden I'll be gone for a week and a half because I'm like, I can't take it. I can't take the time suck that I get stuck on social media and I feel like I have a hard time pulling my attention away. So I just think we can always see ourselves in some of these situations, and don't diagnose yourself. But then also, if you're like, oh my gosh, that's totally me, then absolutely use these tools. So huge issue is, like you said, we know what to eat. And I think this is true for a lot of us. Like a lot of times, lack of information is not the problem. We can Google and figure out pretty easily that, vegetables and some protein is the way to go, right? My listeners have heard me preach like protein, fiber, and fat at every meal. We know these things. Why don't we do it when we have ADHD or other, attention problems?
Yeah, I break this into almost two branches. We get this overwhelm of information. And if you do have ADHD or just resonate with this tendency of like constantly getting more information, because you're like, it's not perfect. Like I need to have it all. And it's the strive for perfection.
That's like analysis paralysis.
Yeah. And what happens, it leads to paralysis, because if it's not perfect, then what's the point, right? It's this really all or nothing thinking. And to the extreme for us with ADHD, it's either, black or white, all or nothing. And we really struggle with finding that balance. So what happens, it's like, okay, I'm either going to be paralyzed from taking any action, and it's Monday morning and I was ready to start this healthy eating plan for the weekend. I'm not, because it's just too much. I'm so overwhelmed. I do nothing. Or it goes the other way. It's like, I'm going to implement everything I know, but that's not sustainable. You can't try and, follow everything you read online, because you're essentially putting together all these puzzle pieces that are all from different puzzles. It's just not sustainable. So in 2 weeks, you fall off, and then this negative thought spiral just comes up. And folks with ADHD, we have a very intense negative thought spiral often. This self-loathing, this, this self-hate, this negative talk, it leaves us in that, why bother? It's too overwhelming. I'm just not going to try it. Or we get that wave of, I'm going to do it. It wasn't perfect. I'm falling off. So it's like this back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Major perfectionist tendencies as well with ADHD. Is that what we see a lot? Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
And I like to think of this negative thought spiral as this newsreel playing in our minds of this negative self-talk, like, you know what, you're not good enough. It's what you're doing isn't enough. It's never going to be enough. You're a failure already. Why bother even trying? It's never worked before. And we all have that in our brains. Like, we have an ego,
Yeah.
but it's to that extreme with us with ADHD often. Not for everyone. Everyone has a range of symptoms and to different degrees, but it's just constantly looping and really loud. And it's really hard to start to quiet that down and find the clarity.
Yeah. I think for women that like it's never going to be good enough is just so constant. If I can't follow this to a T, I know that was a really big issue for me when I was kind of, as my listeners know, on the diet that broke the camel's back, which was macro counting for me. And I was like, well, if I can't do it perfectly, plus or minus 5 grams on every macro every day, like why bother? And so it was like a yo-yo between the anxiety of making sure it was perfect and, well, if it's not going to be perfect, then I'll just screw up the whole day. It's very confusing. Like when I look back, I'm like, what was my brain doing? But you have 4 simple tips to eating well, which I don't know if you were picking that up from the title or if it's how you phrase it too, but I love that right in our Eat Well pillar. What are your 4 simple tips to eating well with ease when you are challenged with ADHD perfectionism?
And the reason these are 4 simple tips is really a big pillar of all of the tips is with ADHD, we overcomplicate everything. We get so overwhelmed with having so much, right? That busy brain, that traffic jam. But when the cars are cleared, it's like, now I can make decisions. Now I know my next step. So these are going to be simple tips, let go of a lot of the fluff. So the first tip is just that it's radical permission. It's giving yourself radical permission to do things your way. Ignore the shoulds and create your own rules. And this was a very, very big one for myself in my own journey being diagnosed with ADHD and throughout my life of learning to eat well and exercise well from a healthy place is when we keep trying to fit into this box that society has created for us. And with ADHD, it's, our whole life, whether you're diagnosed or not, you're trying to fit in because you never feel like you quite do. In reality, we need to create our own box and decorate it exactly as we want to. So it's giving yourself radical permission to be like, I really like quinoa. I'm going to eat that all the time. Or it's like, I hate quinoa. I don't care if it's healthy. I'm not going to eat it because I don't like it. Because we were trying so hard to, follow the rules versus I can create my own rules and I know what's healthy and what feels good for me. So giving yourself, radical permission.
I love that. I think we can learn so much about that from our past food journals. I'm constantly like, your food journal is the most important nutritional study you'll ever read because it tells you what works for you. You don't need to know what works for the guy that's promoting keto on Instagram. You don't need to know what works for the nutrition study they did at Stanford with like the random meal timings. Like that, you can like read all that, but until you do it for yourself and note down how you feel and where your hunger scale was, and if you had any digestive symptoms or mood symptoms, like you can't know. So this bio-individuality of looking at your own food journal and really just saying, you know what, but this is good for me. I had a client the other day, actually just a prospective client. She was like, I typically eat roasted turkey breast for breakfast. That's her like protein of choice. And I'm like, awesome. Is there anyone else out there that's like eating roasted turkey breast for breakfast? Probably not. But she's like, I don't need to eat food everybody else labels as breakfast food because this is what works for me. I'm like, I love it.
I love that example. And I hear similar things all of the time from folks with ADHD. It's like, I can't have breakfast because we also deal with a lot of sensory issues. It's like, I can't have breakfast. Like, I just can't digest it, but I need to eat breakfast. And it's like, do you? Well, maybe it's having a smoothie because that feels good for you. Or maybe it's having something really small because you need that energy boost or that protein, but having something in an hour. And it's really going back to like you said, your food journal, like what makes you feel good. Your body knows what it needs and what it wants. And I also want to tell all the ADHDers out there, if you love a food and you're like, I could eat this every day, go ahead and eat every day. Because we often think
Absolutely.
that's wrong. And
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
So simple tip 2. This one, I hope you really embrace this and run with this. It's my science experiment tip. Because if you think of all of the other tips and everything you've read and heard about healthy eating as a science experiment, a fun 2-week science experiment, it takes off that pressure of it being perfect. It's like, take your hypothesis. It's like, could I eat the same breakfast for 2 weeks straight and not get sick of it and feel good? It's like, I don't know. Can we just test it for 2 weeks? Just see how it goes. There's no wrong answer because it's an experiment. So once you test that hypothesis, you have the data and then you'll know. And this is such a great way to overcome the overwhelm and paralysis, because with us with ADHD, our concept of time is not the same as someone with a neurotypical. So to stick to a meal plan for 30, 60 days, that is like, oh my God, that is just so overwhelming.
Too much. Yeah.
Yeah. But 14 days, it's like, that's just that right amount of time that we can see the effect, but it feels so manageable in our minds. If you think of it as a fun experiment, there's no wrong answer. I promise, and it's going to work for you. You're going to get the data and you're going to make your next step from there.
That is awesome. I love the idea also that's really just speaks to there's no rush. I think a lot of us feel in a rush to lose weight or in a rush to, I got to change my lifestyle. I got to be healthy. And maybe you've seen someone in your life go through, a health crisis and you're like, okay, I got to do it. Or you have a deadline, you've got a wedding or a, high school reunion or some arbitrary thing that you have in your mind, you think you've got to lose weight for. But I promise you, like, there is no deadline for you to be healthy. And taking 2 weeks to see what works, like, let's just see if this breakfast works, just really helps you kind of give up that deadline. Like, you've got your whole life to be healthy. And if it takes you a year, I ask my clients all the time. I'm like, what if it took you a year to get this weight off? Like, are you willing to do it? And that's where we've got to be willing to just try things for a couple weeks and let it be okay if it doesn't work too, right? Because sometimes you get the science experiment where you're like, okay, well, that didn't work. Now I got to try something else.
I love that perspective. And with those, 2-week stints, or just if you want to do something longer, this is something you can do forever. You could be like, that didn't work for me, but in 3 years, I'm going to run that experiment again. Oh, it totally does work for me, right? You change, what your likes change. Your body's also very adaptable.
And I noticed too, my schedule changes. And maybe this is just because of the stage of life I'm in. I'm a lot older than Gaia, by the way. So, we've already gone through all of the elementary school days. School started at 9, and then I had some in elementary and some in high school, and they were going to school at like 6. And so I just find my mornings, especially my morning routine, has changed drastically over the time that I have been raising kids. And now I just have one left in high school. In California, they decided a year ago that high schoolers were getting up too early. They need more sleep. And so they pushed back the time of high school starting. So she doesn't start till like 8:30. So I've been like gloriously sleeping in is what I consider it. And anyway, point being, I notice my schedule changes, and therefore what I want to eat, particularly for breakfast, changes because of the time that I have. Because if I'm fixing breakfast for little kids, as opposed to now my big kids, just, they're on their own. So I think allow yourself, knowing, maybe you've started a new job, or your husband did, or your partner, something has changed in your life, your schedule changes. I think time to run a new experiment sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited what will come from the change into, the school year that you started and after for summer break.
Yeah.
So simple tip number 3, is keeping it basic and giving yourself permission to throw away the recipes for meals. Folks with ADHD, we want to follow recipes. We really do, but they're so overwhelming. Like the
I love that.
ingredients, the steps. And I have personally found every time I, muster all that clarity to follow a recipe, it never seems to turn out. So I'm like, no, it's not worth the mental struggle. So what I personally follow and have helped all my previous wellness clients with is choose, your protein, fat, and carb, or I know for your listeners, Lisa, it's, fiber, if whatever is going to connect with you in your brain of how your foods. So choose your favorite protein, choose your favorite carb or fiber source, choose your favorite fat, because if you like all the parts, you're going to love the sum. You're going to love the total, what's going to come from this. So for myself, I don't like that stuff. I like some rices, but I love corn tortillas. So I will literally eat that for every meal. A corn tortilla as like my carb source. And then I'm going to have a fish for my protein. I love fish. My fat source, often some oil, maybe like some feta cheese. And then often I'll pair in fiber with maybe some chickpeas. I love that. Some people may hate that or look at it and be like, that's weird. Doesn't matter. I love all those individual things. So together, of course, it's going to be good. So when you open your fridge and you're like, I don't know what to have for supper or for lunch, what's a favorite protein source? What's a favorite fat source? What's a favorite carb and fiber source? And reach for those. And I promise you'll enjoy your meal.
That's fun. I think that's really fun. I think cooking can be really overwhelming for people. I'm curious, when you were saying throw away the recipe, something I've talked with some of my clients with lately, especially getting going in the school year and just the busy nature of, honestly, the holiday season coming up. I know it feels far away. Gaia and I are talking in August, and so this will publish in a couple of weeks. So I'm wondering about meal delivery services. So things like, I don't have an affiliation with any of them, but I'm talking like HelloFresh, Blue Apron, those sorts of things. Do those work for ADHD folks when they come with all the parts like cut and ready or individually packaged and just a steps? Does that work?
That's a great question. So some of my clients love that. They found great success with it. For myself too, I've used those. I'm like, oh, this is so wonderful to like know what you're eating. Everything's there. And this is where it comes back to tip one, which really underpins them all, of give yourself radical permission. If that works for you, fantastic. And the other part I'll add to it, because I've noticed this myself and some clients, is that we always need to like make things our own. It's never quite enough. And there's this underlying, ADHDism of like, it's not quite enough. I need a little bit more. It's never enough. It's never enough. So we can create that meal and we're like, but maybe I want to, add in my own ingredients. Maybe I want to combine two of these recipes together. We tend to want to do that. Not everyone, but it is something that comes up. So give yourself permission. Know that, hey, if I have some almonds in my cupboard and that would be so good on this salad, even though it was in the recipe, I can add those and that's okay. And it's just coming back to giving yourself permission to know that this works for me. This tastes good. This feels good. But meal prep, awesome. I love it.
Yeah. Sounds a little bit like also just kind of giving yourself permission to let go of a little perfectionism, like not following the recipe perfectly is totally okay. And just giving yourself that permission.
Absolutely. There's many times when I've had the meal delivery services and I'm like, I don't like this part of the meal, and that's okay to let that go. But previous me wouldn't have been able to do that. And then you're eating a meal, you're like, I don't fully like this.
Yeah. Another thing I just saw, which I thought was a great idea, was just like a random reel on Instagram. It was a sandwich place that basically, I don't know, some sort of like unwich, which was basically their lettuce wrapped sandwich. And they purchased the lettuce wrapped sandwich and then came home and stuck it on a cutting board and just chopped it all up. And it was a salad. And I was like, what? Because way more protein in a sandwich than if, you just get sprinkled on top. And I thought that just kind of speaks to this, like, you don't need a recipe. You can just make it your own, things that you like, if those are flavors you like, but you feel like a salad. I don't know. I just thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, which
Anyway,
leads me right into this tip number 4. What
perfect.
beautiful segue, which I call my healthy meal blueprint, which you're gonna get as a freebie. Maybe we can link in the show notes. I have a training
Perfect. Yeah.
video on how to go about this. And really following this blueprint is gonna show you how to meal plan your entire week in 10 minutes. It's what I do all the time. And it combines tip 1 and 3. The first one being permission, radical permission. The third tip being keep it basic. So how this healthy meal blueprint works is that you're going to choose one meal to be exactly the same every single day. For me, that's breakfast. So choose something that you absolutely love that you're like, I could eat this forever. And then give yourself permission to change it when you do get sick of it. Now, the other 2 meals of the day, assuming 3 meals in a day, if you have more meals, perfectly okay. You'll just repeat this framework for the other meals. Is that they're going to be the same theme or the same format. Meaning, if you have a salad and you love salads for lunch, great, have a salad every day, but the ingredients change and give yourself permission to put whatever you want into it. It's just an uncooked meal. And now you could also change that to, I'm going to have a stir fry as that format, meaning the ingredients change, but it's always the same type of cooking method. But you could also play with, like Lisa said, this lettuce wrap and then turn into a salad. It's like, maybe I always have the same ingredients, but I cook them differently. So it's like, I'm always having some sort of like lettuce, some greens, some chicken, maybe some tomatoes and cucumber. But one day I'm going to put in a wrap with some ranch dressing. Other day it's going to be a salad with, some balsamic vinegar and oil on top. So this way you have a system in place and it's going to reduce the decisions you're making every day for what to eat. It's like minimizing that traffic jam of cars in your mind. You're like, I've cleared some cars. I know breakfast, always the same. I know I'm always doing a stir fry for lunch. I know for supper, I'm always making something with chicken. And when we can reduce those decisions, you still have that flexibility that we crave, that creativity and freedom of, I want to have chicken with rice today or chicken with pasta. But it's not giving you too much freedom that we get overwhelmed and fall into paralysis.
Perfect. That's so great. It's just really similar to my go-to meals, which a lot of my listeners have heard me talk about. So it's just a different way to think about making meal planning easier. We've got to have ways to make it simpler because otherwise you just walk into the kitchen and open the fridge and the thought my brain likes to offer me is, well, you've never made anything good in your life and lunch, so I don't know what you're going to have today. And I'm like, really? Really? I'm still thinking that? And so having go-to meals is the way I phrase it, or having this framework that Gaia is going to give you in her freebie will really help reduce those kind of runaway thoughts in your brain. And also just that whole perfection thing of like, well, it's got to be perfect. I have to make the perfect meal to make sure I lose weight or be healthy or whatever it is that's going for you as far as your goals at the time. So that sounds really great. And yes, we will put the link to that in the show notes. How else can people get a hold of you or find you in the world?
Yeah, so I am on YouTube and we can link my YouTube in the show notes as well. And I have all my full length training videos on natural solutions for ADHD, as well as the wellness pillars, sleep, stress management, eating healthy, and exercise. So you can go binge that. I am on Instagram. I am no longer active on there, but I do have just a ton of content from over the last couple of years that you can also go check out. So you can link that as well. It's all at ADHD Wellness Co. So you will be able to find it fairly easily.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Gaia. You've been really fun to talk to. And I think this has just been a great topic.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
If this episode has helped you in any way, all I ask is for you to share it. Share it with one friend or share it on your social media, tag me, and I'll give you a shout out as well. I have been getting a lot of comments lately about how beneficial the free content is that I have been putting out in the world, and sharing it can really help someone else. You can also leave a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and review the show on Apple Podcasts. That also really makes it easier for other people to find it because Apple loves that, and then they push it out to more people. So your review actually helps other women. Have a great week, and as always, thanks for listening to the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast.